to a special edition of Random Encounter, the RPG fan podcast. This is your co-host, John McCarroll. Unfortunately, Rob is not here today, but I do have two very special guests. I have Richard Rodriguez, who is the QA lead at Atlas on Gungnir.
Hi there.
And I have a man that you met a couple of months ago, Aram Jabari, who is the PR manager at Atlas.
Hello.
And as you may have guessed, seeing that Richard is the QA lead on Gungnir, we're going to talk about Gungnir, which new title from Atlas and Sting being the developers of Knights in the Nightmare, Yggdra Union, Hexus Force, and all these other very complicated RPGs that many of you know and love. So Richard or Aram, whichever one of you wants to start, can you give us a brief kind of overview of if you want to, even Department Heaven as a whole, and then how Gungnir fits in?
Well, in terms of the Department Heaven series, like if you're familiar with it, like a lot of the games, they don't really kind of continue from one to the other. There's no like real connections between them aside from maybe like a character here and there and like the mythology there. So it really just kind of sits in its own little area within the series overall. I mean, the biggest connection to other games would be seeing some characters like Pamela the Witch is there, and like the Norse mythology is like definitely heavily in this game, like with some of the other ones as well. As for this game itself, it's mainly just about like this kind of conflict going on in this nation where there's like this race of people called the Leonikins that are being oppressed by the noble race of the Daltons. And the whole story is basically like you just kind of giving your ragtag group, like creating resistance, like making your way across the nation to kind of oust this like oppressive government that's going on.
For anyone who's unfamiliar with Sting's games, there was a really cool write-up I just saw by Kat Bailey on Joystick. I hope it's okay for you,
yeah,
John, for me to drop that. But she went into detail about the Depth Heaven series and just Sting's philosophy in general. And for anyone who's unfamiliar, basically, I think the first one that came out in North America would have been Riviera, the Promised Land, which was, for the most part, I guess you could say it was more of a straightforward RPG than Yggdra Union and Knights and the Nightmare, in that it was not a strategy RPG. But it was unique in that it kind of depended heavily on the items. The items were very core in item management, weapon management, durability. And then for the next game, Yggdra Union, it was this very interesting mix of like real time and turn-based strategy RPG elements. Knights in the Nightmare was this amazingly weird mix of strategy RPG and bullet hell action. So one of the things that the constant for Sting is that there seems to be no consistency or constancy between genre from game to game within the same universe. And it's very bold game making. It's very, sometimes I think maybe from one game to the other in the same series, they maybe lose a fan just because like they go from a traditional RPG to something that's totally crazy. But I think anyone who gives the games time and dives into them finds some of the most nuanced, layered, intricate, complex, and rewarding games. Even Hexus Force, which was probably the most straightforward RPG of their entire universe.
That was actually not.
That was not Depth Heaven. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So with Gungnir, on a scale from Hexus Force to Knights in the Nightmare, where is it on the crazy scale?
I'd actually put it like in the lower half of the scale. Sure. Like it's pretty straightforward SRPG. There's just like a lot of little nuances here and there. It's definitely not like Knights where it's like its own genre entirely, or even Yggdra. I'd say it's basically around like where Riviera is, like in terms of how far off it is from the natural RPG. Much RPG in this case.
Much closer to Luminous Arc, Final Fantasy Tactics, and the kind of the tried and true Disgaea, the pillars of the genre, as opposed to something more experimental, I think, like Knights and Nightmare.
Well, it's interesting that you draw a comparison to Disgaea. I've only had a chance to play a few hours of the game, but it seems very interesting that things in Gungnir are very focused about time, whereas Disgaea, you could move your characters around almost indefinitely. It seems like Gungnir is very controlled. You get one turn every now and again. You can move one character, but then you can interrupt. You can speed things up. You can move your turns around. And can you go into detail about this time system for our listeners? I just find it very intriguing.
Oh, yeah, well, it's kind of like how you said, where like they put a lot of control or restrictions on like what you can do, but at the same time, it's very open because on the one hand, yeah, you can only control one character when it's your party's turn to act. However, you can control like any character you want. You can keep controlling the same guy over and over during your turn, and only switch over to those support characters like when it's useful.
And that structure plays into the context of the story, right? I mean, there's like you said, this ragtag group comes together. They don't have an indefinite amount of time to.
Oh yeah, you could look at it like that, just in terms of like their kind of low level approach to it. More kind of makeshift
guerrilla.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was going to ask a follow-up question, but if you have more to say, I will let you finish.
Oh no, I was going to kind of clarify, but no, go ahead.
Now, so in regards to being able to control one character over and over again, one thing that I've seen happen in many strategy RPGs, specifically Fire Emblem, is you really focus on one character and then you kind of get screwed over. Do you think that I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I haven't gotten to the point where I can only use one character. I have to heal. I have other support stuff. And I think, honestly, you have to move around with the beat system. So I just answered my own question. So why don't you talk about the beat system?
Oh, well, first let me just clarify. When I was saying controlling more than one or using the same character more than once, I guess I was kind of exaggerating where you're not going to always use the same character over and over. But when that time comes where you really want to use them twice in a row, you have that option. And even in terms of using the same character, they have their own wait time meter, which will increase. And if you want to keep using them, they'll start their max HP will actually start dropping. So there are definitely things in place that kind of force you to move around and use the other characters as well. But like you said, the beat system, yeah, it's definitely one of the better systems within the game where you use all your party members, attack buff anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4 characters all at once. And it's really where a lot of the strategy in the game is in terms of controlling the battlefield, placing your units in the right spots before you wait to take the time to attack. It can be the difference between 100 damage attack versus a 500 damage one.
And risk reward is a very long running theme in Sting games. I remember Hexes had a system that was based almost entirely on risk reward and how you would allocate your points for your special abilities in battle.
No, yeah, that's a very good point. I know a lot of times, I wouldn't use the beat system just because, oh no, I got to attack this guy right now when I have a chance. But it's if you use that forethought, no, if I move him here, wait to attack, get my other guy here, those 2 attacks will end up being more than 2 separate attacks would have been on its own.
It seems like it works almost like the link system from Front Mission 5, which is a game that I'm still incredibly bitter about its lack of localization. But yeah, it seems like you almost. If you're more patient right up until the point where you can't be patient anymore, it pays off the most, which as opposed to I playing Tactics Ogre last month where I just let's go grinding, and then I really don't have to use any strategy whatsoever. And I'm digging on the game so far. Also, one system that I'm kind of unclear on is you have all your story characters, and then you have characters that you can recruit. They just say, they show up in camp. Would you like to hire these people? Can you go into a little bit of detail about the mercenary system where you can hire people? I haven't really gotten in depth with that, and I'm not sure I understand it.
Oh, basically, like you mentioned, there's the camp, and then there's also the guild. And the difference between the two is the camp, you only occasionally have a camp area in between battles where you'll get new recruits that'll automatically volunteer. But for the most part, you're going to get all your recruits from the guild. And the way the guild works is that you can offer up an amount of money, just anywhere from 1 to 100,000 gold. And basically, how much you offer, and depending on what time of the story it is, that'll determine what mercenaries you'll attract. So it's something I got 50 grand. Who's going to work for me for that much money? And then from there, you'll get a set of 3 guys that you can check their stats and see which one works the best. Meanwhile, if you're looking for a particular type of unit, let's say the wizards, which only use a certain weapon, then you would offer that certain weapon along with your money, and that way you're guaranteed to only get mercenaries that only use that type of weapon. And even then, you'll always have a choice of 3. And of course, one of the drawbacks of the system is you can't just keep on offering money and think, oh no, I don't like those guys, take it back, offer some more money. Because if you just reject all the recruits, they take 10% transaction fee no matter what, and you end up losing that gold.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't know. It seems that the systems really mesh well in this game. I mean, it's even sometimes on accident I'll have my character set up where it's beat and boost. And one thing I'm really bad at reading tutorials, so this is why I'm asking a lot of questions. So it's this is a tutorial, hit buttons, and it's really not something that you can do in a Sting game. But can you talk to me about like finding the bases on the map? I know that contributes the amount of tactics that you have, but I'm not sure 100% how.
Well, that's true. Well, basically, every base you get will increase your maximum amount of tactic points by 2. So you start off, you can only get a max of 10, but if you take over the whole map, you get as much as 20. And the reason you want to increase tactic points, or how you increase the actual tactic points themselves, it's basically just by moving along the map. So if you're like just sitting in the same spot attacking an enemy and like not actually moving around or just trying to like exploit the same area, you're not going to get a lot of tactics points. But for every step to a new square that you guys take, that'll increase it. In terms of actually using the points, first there's the obvious stuff like the beat tactics, which requires a certain amount. Boost tactics, those require a certain amount. Same thing with like scramble as well. But then there's also like more minor stuff, such as there's weapons that have a base damage value and then they have a base like tactical damage value. And weapons that have a tactical damage value will increase their damage will increase with your tactics. And it gets to the point where like a character's attack might do as much as like triple damage if you have a lot of tactic points. So that's something that's definitely like worth keeping an eye on and going for over the course of the battle.
Okay. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, John, I wanted to say you mentioned a couple times about how there's a lot of balance to how all these different tactical elements that are in the game. And I wanted to reiterate, for anyone who has never really played a Sting game, there is this consistent thread of the more you invest in a Sting game, whether it's an RPG or a strategy RPG or one of the kind of bizarre amalgams that just works of both, the more you invest, the more you get out of it. It's a very the games are rewarding the deeper you go. And some people, I think, are overwhelmed by the number of menus and so much text, so many statistics. But the thing that I think the takeaway is for anyone who's just looking for a strategy RPG, they'll find a lot to like with Gungnir. It has a lot of the same. You have to manage where your units are on the battlefield, and you have to basically be smart about your tactics for the most part. But there is a lot of these systems and elements that you can dive into. And I'm not saying they're all fully elective and optional. I think the game is rather hard if you don't know how to properly use things like the beat system. But if you really want to dive into it, just to the bottom of the pool, you'll find the game is willing to reward you for every step down you go. So for anyone who's kind of never played a Sting game and wondering, Gungnir, like all the other games in their lineup or their library, is willing to meet you every step of the way.
And I found Gungnir to be a little bit more friendly than both Knights of the Nightmare and Yggdra Union, which is a positive for me. I mean, they don't lack the depth that the other games have, but they're certainly more friendly to newcomers or people who don't, or at least thus far, who don't want to dive, and min-max after every battle, which is certainly a positive.
There's definitely a lot more like familiar like game mechanics. Versus the other ones you mentioned.
So Gungnir is a PSP title, and I wanted to hear, since Atlas does a lot of localization of Japanese titles, what do you guys think about the current market? It seems like every other news story that we're publishing from Japan is a new game on the PSP, but the platform's all but dead here in North America. How do you think that what are your thoughts on kind of the PSP market as it stands right now?
Well, I think you're right to identify it as more vibrant or more healthy in Japan. I think that just from an objective standpoint, when you look at the numbers, and Monster Hunter, I think, was this tremendous beast in Japan in terms of moving PSP systems. We don't view the PSP as we look at it as a very viable platform for our fans. We've had a lot of great titles under our brand come out on PSP. We know a lot of our fans have a PSP, or maybe they've upgraded and they have the PlayStation Vita. But with the Vita, they still have the ability to purchase Gungnir or the game that comes out the month after that, Growlance or Wayfarer of Time, which they're both really in the same genre, the same target player. And so I think the reality of the Japanese game market is that as there is handhelds are huge in Japan. I think from a development standpoint, there's some element where it's you can be a little faster and a little lighter on your feet when you're developing for handheld. But also, I think handheld just as a play style is super popular. when I was in Tokyo a year and a half ago, everyone is far more comfortable busting out a PSP or 3DS or Vita just in public. They didn't have a Vita back then, obviously, but like in the subways, and those games are coming out in Japan, and a lot of people ask us about our direction as a publisher, and they think that, oh, Atlas is going all Western RPG and Atlas is abandoning Japanese RPGs. And it's not really the case, although it keeps coming up. It's just a matter of what games are available for us to bring out that fall into that tradition of ours. And Gungnir, Growlancer fall into that 100%. Yes, the PSP is not the same system in terms of maybe trajectory today as it was 2 years ago, but we believe in the user base, the install base. We believe in there being this fan base that's still excited for this kind of game, and so we're still confident to put it out. It's 2012, and obviously there aren't another 10 years of legs under the PSP, but we have this really cool way in which we can deliver the game on UMD, and we are planning a simultaneous launch on PlayStation Network when the game releases in June. And so we can cater to PSP Go users, we can cater to PlayStation Vita users, and it's our intention to do everything possible to make sure the game is compatible at launch on Vita as well. So we look at it as a really big audience.
Okay. Now, here's the hardball question that you're not going to like. Sting had released a couple of games in Japan for the PSP, Blaze Union and Gloria Union. It seems like Atlas has published just about every other Sting game in North America. Is there a reason why these were passed over?
There is no one reason for those titles or for any title that I can ever cite. There are a number of factors, though, that come into play. In most recently, a lot of the times it's been an issue of looking at specific titles and just thinking about, based on what the game is, how feasible or how likely the game's path to profitability would be. Because at the end of the day, we still want to be able to continue our business and keep the lights on. And I'm not necessarily saying that any one game is less likely to be profitable here. But I think in some specific cases, it was maybe decided that the projects would have a tougher path to come here. And there are other factors as well. A lot of times, the amount of voice acting that's in a game. For example, we got Growlancer Wayfarer of Time that comes out in July, and we look at that game as a project that it's been. Growlancer 4 was expected or desired by fans in North America for a very long time. 2 and 3 came out, 5 came out, and fans were asking. 4 is considered one of the best in the series, and so we're going to release it. And we were very upfront about the fact that apart from the anime cutscenes, we wouldn't be able to voice the game. That was one of those difficult decisions that we had to make because we wanted to bring the game out, and yet we knew that it would be far more expensive and difficult for us to go ahead and do the full localization. It's not that we didn't want to. It's not that we were looking to cut a corner. It was just a matter of, is it better at the end of the day for us to be able to deliver this game in English, with this one concession for our fans, or for it to never come to the States? And sometimes we're able to make a decision like that, and then sometimes we just decide it's not going to work.
Yeah, it blows my mind sometimes. I forget what it was. Oh, Xseed announced Way of the Samurai 4 being a digital-only title. Mm-hmm. And we had people on our message boards on our Facebook saying, I'm not going to buy this game because it's digital only. And I don't get it, because I'd rather have more games in English, no matter the format, than no games in English.
There's two things on that. I think I would imagine that people with that sentiment, it's less about the fact that it's less about viewing digital as a negative from the standpoint of I think a lot of our fans too, they really want to own games, and they like being able to hold the game in their hands. I don't think that's a reflection on the game at all. In fact, I was up in San Francisco and had a chance to run into the Xseed folks, and I saw Way of the Samurai 4 in person, and it actually is a fantastically entertaining game. You lose a little bit of visibility when you're just downloadable, and I mean, obviously it's really nice to have a product on a shelf, But yeah, I'm definitely with you. There's such an opportunity. I think it's very analogous to something like a Kickstarter. Like the game wouldn't come out if it was, a physical package has a lot of costs and overhead and things involved that make it far less feasible. And it's kind of like if you can find a way to bring it over, wouldn't you rather have it in some form than not at all? And like you said, but I can understand when people have that reaction. I think it's a gut reaction. I think people just that maybe they don't want to be tied to a storefront, an online storefront. They want to physically hold the game. I like smelling manuals. You know that, John. I'm a notorious manual smeller.
Yeah, well, and you know what? I think that oftentimes, people's bark is worse than their bite. We've seen the massive uproar about, Diablo 3, which, even though it's not the reason Rob's not here, I'm going to say that it is. And, Blizzard comes out that it sold 6.7 million copies or whatever it was in its first week. So I think that sometimes we get people that are angry, but, at the end of the day, they decide that they want the game.
I've read a lot of articles recently about the merits of pre-orders and what are they for? What are reserving copies of games for? And for anyone who has that kind of that feeling or that sentiment, the one reality for small publishers, for niche publishers like us, is that those pre-orders are invaluable metrics and analytics for our retail partners to figure out whether a game should be brought in any sort of reasonable quantity. And when that isn't there, it's very difficult for them and then in turn for us to justify physically producing the game. Because again, physically producing the game, there are limits to how many quantities have to be made. And obviously you have all these shipping costs, there's the dry goods, the manual and things like that. So while I don't think any publisher wants to just, if everyone could make a physical product in addition to having a downloadable version, I think everyone would, because that's one more way to reach a customer that might not otherwise get the game. The reality is, though, sometimes there just isn't enough. It ends up being too big of a leap of faith. And we are endlessly optimistic and hopeful. And, there's like cans of unicorn meat in the office. We are believers. But there's some leaps of faith that are just too big for us to make because we really do need to plan out a future that involves the light staying on here at Atlas.
Yeah. And, I would rather have the games come over than to not have them come over. So, it comes down to, I think a lot of people don't realize that while video games are fun and a lot of people view video games as artwork, which is not an argument I'm going to get into here, at the end of the day, it's a business. The people that are producing these are producing them so that they can feed their families and keep the lights on. So, we can't get everything that we want, but we can support the products and the companies that do the things we like Atlas. So, well, I appreciate both of you taking the time to talk to me today, and we're very excited for Gungnir, which is going to be out June 12th.
Gungnir is going to be out June 12th. That's right. And again, we're planning. It will be released at this time. The plan is UMD and also PlayStation Network. And again, our goal is to make sure that it's compatible for PlayStation Vita users day one. So if you're a Vita owner, remember that's a high priority for us because we do believe that this game and then Growlancer Wayfarer of Time, we're going to see more and more digital or downloadable purchases.
Yes, which, by the way, if you don't own a lot of the Atlas PSP games, not too recently you guys dropped the price on a great deal of them.
Oh, John, you're so awesome for mentioning that. Absolutely, we did. And specifically the Sting games, the Depth Heaven games dropped pretty dramatically, 50% in some cases. And so whether you're a fan of the Sting games, the Depth Heaven games, or if you want to check out our Persona series of games on PSP, actually Persona 1, Persona 2 Innocent Sin, and Persona 3 Portable are all available currently on PlayStation Network, and they all work on the Vita, if you happen to be a Vita owner.
Yay! So I like those. So I also like Kenka Bancho, which is surprisingly hilarious.
Yeah, I know. I saw, maybe it was on Destructoid, some user post had been, or they like promoted it, and it was why Kenkabancha was one of the best PSP games, or among the best PSP games of all time, and that's high praise. That's very high praise. It is an incredibly fun game, for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys again. I appreciate it. And for our listeners, I guess this is the end of the podcast because you've already listened to Rob ramble on about Diablo for, I don't know how long that podcast will be, 4.5 hours? Who knows? He could talk forever. But thank you.